And now we set the stage because it's time to widen the lens of conversations. The first panel gave us frontline leadership, insights, and moving on with the next leadership conversation, we look at the broader economic forces that are shaping the future of hospitality in India. The session titled India on the Move, the Economic Sparring Travels Next Decade brings together leaders from hospitality, aviation, and digital payment sectors that are collectively enabling India's next phase of travel growth. Because hotels don't operate in silos, they move with aviation capacity, with digital ecosystems, and accelerate with policy. May I invite our esteemed panelists onto the stage, please. Can we have the panelists for the session onto the stage, please?
Please.
Mr. Patu Keswani, Mr. Sandeep Ghosh, Mr. Vinay Dubey, and moderating and getting the best out of each one of them is Mr. Rajesh Mago. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, gentlemen and the ladies. First, I have to actually not now compliment. I was going to compliment Mandeep for the brilliant idea of standing tables and having a chat more standing than sitting. I don't know what went wrong with him. Suddenly, he just changed it to the sitting chair. So, Mandeep, I don't know what. I thought it was a great idea. Maybe you looked at our age. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or the fitness levels, I don't know. But you have no idea how high energy and fit Mr. Keswani is here. All right, so I guess we have a very positive and exciting topic that Mandeep has given it to us. The panelists, all three are very diverse. I don't think Patu needs any introduction for this hall, clearly. One of the most successful founder of the hospitality chain, very successful hospitality chain in India. Vinay Dubey, for those who don't know him, is actually a very, very deep, thoughtful leader of the aviation industry. I actually personally have a lot of respect for him. I've been sort of associated working with him as partners for many, many years. And when we were thinking about it and Mandeep was discussing curating this panel, I thought of him. I thought it would be a good idea to have him on the panel to just get his thoughts on the overall travel and tourism, as well as India growth story as well. So welcome, Vinay.
Thank you.
And Sandeep. You know, he's part of, one of the global iconic companies in the payment space, Visa. He looks after India and South Asia operations. So welcome, Sandeep, as well. So we'll get some global perspective from Sandeep. But let's get started. In the morning I was here, and Sandeep also walked in, and I don't know when you were listening to it. Patu came in a little late. But Dr. Srivatsa and Karan, he first gave a talk on India growth story, and then Karan shared like plethora of data points just to back that up. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, both of them have actually made my job a little tougher. And then I was thinking on the fly that how do I sort of bring some twist to our sort of conversation? Because the story of India is compelling right now, right? If you look at it for the last 10, 15 years, whichever way you look at it, there have been many, many macro factors that has been just driving the economy. And even the outlook is also very, very promising. Like, for example, people talked about it in different shape and form, but like the demographic dividend that India enjoys today, and it's going to be there for many, many years as compared to the rest of the world. Rising income, younger population, working population, probably is the biggest advantage that everybody is talking about, which is sort of driving consumption and so on and so forth. And if all of that is true, then we also have to to see, what could potentially go wrong. So maybe the first question for all of you, and love to get view from each one of you, that if the macro drivers look really, really good for India, everything seems to be working, and it's sort of reflected in the GDP growth story as well, that is there anything that we should be watching out for, which could possibly go wrong, as one dimension of the question. The second one is also, I'm thinking if these are the tailwinds that we have in the country, then maybe the potential of the growth is double digit. And so what's holding us to stay at 6.5%, 7%? Sometimes we grapple with, those numbers, but we haven't really been able to sort of maybe, taken like a, phenomenal double-digit growth for the next, maybe think about that maybe for the next decade or two. So what is that structurally? Is there anything that is structurally holding us? Or what is that government or the Indian industries, private sector, because, the secretary spoke about it, by the way, put a lot of onus on the private sector as well, that we need to do that we tap into this maximum potential and we don't mess it up. So maybe we can start with you, Batu, on this.
See, I think India, has come from a culture and a backdrop of deprivation. So if I look at the quality of our people, the quality of our skill sets, and I've been on many of these same, national skill councils, I think we need to completely reinvent two things: our education and our innovation. Because I ask very fundamental questions here. We say we are the fifth largest, then fourth largest, then second largest, and the largest company in India is a $200 billion company.
Yeah.
When are we going to see a $1 trillion company in India? Where? And why don't we? Okay. So to me, the reality is consumption in India is maybe 6, 7, 8 million households. That's the reality. Maybe we say they are 300 million, but consumption is very small. 20% of India's GDP is consumption, discretionary, non-staples. That's what, 800 billion. So we're not a market. We must accept it. Rather than say we are the fourth largest, we are the fourth largest because we have the largest population. So I think we need to reinvent on a mission, on a critical priority mission, the way we educate and the way we do and how the government should encourage R&D and innovation. It's not on the private sector. You have to support it. Look at, the other countries. So I'm giving you, obviously, there are 100 answers, but these to me, personally, as an Indian, are the two most critical things.
Got it. What's your view, Vinay?
So on a social level, to build the country, certainly, there's no healthcare, education, things like that. But in aviation in particular, I don't think it's single digits. And it hasn't been single digits for over a decade now. And for the next 10 to 20 years, I look at this as double digits. And this is where the demographics, the age, the GDP per capita, which is not just the spending power, but the elasticity of demand, all of these are real. And we see it in our business every single day. And I think that double digit for us has been a reality and will continue to be a reality. No issues there. The second part of your question is what can go wrong? Look, unfortunately, I'm in aviation, which means something is going to go wrong every single year. We had this volcano in Iceland a little over a decade ago that disrupted transatlantic traffic, and I was a little reticent to use that as an example of the kinds of things that can go wrong in aviation, but then we had a volcano of our own here in Ethiopia that disrupted our traffic. So whether it's foreign exchange, volcanoes, pandemics, geopolitics, the state of the economy, look, there's something always going wrong in aviation. And yes, we can look at the government structurally to make changes, but historically the government has done nothing to make one airline successful and bankrupt another airline. And so I always like to look at it in terms of our own self and what we can do. And in aviation, there are sort of two critical factors that you must do. to be able to get through what is the inevitable curveball that will be thrown at you. One is to be well capitalized, and the other one is to have a hyper-competitive cost structure. And if you have these two, you need other things. This is not sufficient, but if you have these two, you can weather the ups and downs.
Yeah, got it. I'm going to follow up on that in a bit with you, Vinay, on that, because, like you rightly pointed out, there are many things that keep going wrong with the aviation industry, but I'll follow up on that just in a bit. Sandeep, what do you think?
So again, Mandeep and Rajesh, thank you for having me here. Delighted to be here with Vinay and Patu on this panel. The path to success and heaven is never paved with gold. So there is lots that can go wrong. But again, to my mind, the 2 or 3 things that worry me is, the demographic dividend is of precious value if you don't have good infrastructure, if you don't have good training, skilling for the youth who need to get employed. So the last thing you need is for half your country to be below the age of 35, but not gainfully employed. That can actually have a bigger backlash than actually pay a dividend yield. The second sort of thing is, again, if infrastructure lags, and if the major cities in India have a AQI of between 100 and 400, you aren't going to get tourists. Your actual population is going to fall ill, and that's not going to really be helpful. Your healthcare costs in the country will just go up, regardless of whether people are insured or not. Safety, security, hygiene. There's such a great story about digital payments, but there's also a lot of digital fraud that is happening in the country. So again, the intent is not to be negative. I think everyone here is bullish about India's long-term prospects, but we really need to look at each of the positives that we cite and be very clear as to what are the things that need to be in place for the positive factors to actually play out as intended. So, I would say we shouldn't get into this nationalism wave. We need competition, we need interoperability, we need phenomenal education, healthcare, training, skilling happening in the country, and we definitely need a lot of infrastructure, and we need to worry about the environment. If we don't get these basic fundamentals right, that demographic dividend, that consumption flywheel, and all the other wonderful stuff that we talk about will actually not materialize to its full potential.
I couldn't agree more with you, Sandeep. And what it also means is that there's a lot of onus on us and government for us to be able to sort of invest behind in any of these areas for us to be able to do it. Because it is there, it's available, it is for us to be able to make sure that we will be able to do it. But just very quick follow-up on the first question that you made, first comment that you made on the employment generation, right? So do you think AI can be a spoilsport?
Again, it's there's so many pundits who've been talking about this on the sidelines of the AI summit. I almost find that intimidating to come up with a unique point of view.
Yeah.
But I think the general consensus is that, if AI does deliver all the wonderful things it's capable of delivering, it will actually unlock a lot of opportunity. But the timing of the impact on certain sectors and segments and the unlock may not coincide. So there's going to be disruption and displacement, but eventually, economies are going to benefit, corporations will benefit, but the pocket where the impact is happening and where the benefit may not absolutely be coincident. The skill sets that will get made redundant and the skill sets that will then be needed may not all kind of play out at the same point in time, is my sense.
I think well put. And given that we are also a tech-led organization, we've been just investing in technology forever. At the bare minimum, our take is that it is real, it is here and real, and we should all embrace it, like not be in denial mode at all, and start sort of investing, working, leveraging whatever you can possibly do, and then learn from here, and then see where we go with this, right? So, all right, let's move on. Let's talk about Indian consumers a little bit, because when we look at our data, there are two distinct, and it was just sheer coincidence we have. I promise you, I have not compared notes with either Karan or Dr. Sirivarts, but it was uncanny. Same points were made because it's real, because everybody is looking at the same data. The two distinct trends that are emerging as far as consumers are concerned, Indian consumers are concerned. One is about the Gen Zs and the millennials, the younger population. How are they spending their disposable income? One, the income is rising and they have more disposable income. And the portion of disposable income that is going into, in fact, in Karan's presentation earlier, there was a lot of focus on high-value products, etc. But what we see, there is a lot of money being spent actually on experiences as well, which is like travel is right up there on the experiences is one. The second trend that we have seen is that people are looking for better experience. Now you call it as better value for money, or you call it, as it was called in the morning, as premiumization. That's also very, very clear. Now the question for both of you first, and then I'll come to you, Sandeep. In the context of your business, aviation for you, hospitality for you, have you seen this happening? And more importantly, has it sort of influenced your product/business strategy or not?
I think certainly the way we consume, my parents consumed, I consumed, my kids consume are vastly different.
Little bit.
Okay? I think, am I audible?
Now.
Yeah. So my parents, middle class, government servants, pure price. Okay. Yeah. Trade-off would be on quality. Me, a little more focused on quality and value for money. My kids, or kids of that age, you're absolutely right. They're looking for more. They're much more aspirational.
Yeah.
And actually that worries me vis-a-vis what we were just discussing, which is what are the opportunities in India. The rate of growth of aspiration is actually much greater than the rate of growth of opportunity. So coming there, we recognized it, we've renovated our entire portfolio. Of course, it's also partly to reprice it. But I'm still grappling with how, having a very focused cost structure, what are the add-on experiences I can offer without playing with my cost structure? So if I looked at it, we are a little more frugal in that sense. We are not into little boutique hotels and, nature walks and so on. We try and tie up with such people, but we don't ourselves. And I think it's something we'll have to solve for as this trend becomes a majoritarian trend for me.
But let's say that if the growth rate, which is what we are seeing, if it is coming more and more for, let's say, the new users, if not like, overall growth, if you will, is coming from tier 3 and tier 4 cities. Mm-hmm. Will that not influence your sort of hotel expansion strategy? Of course it will, but I'm
saying to me that the fact that some things you do are is to maintain where you are in a competitive way, and some is to improve your market share, right? Yeah. I'm not seeing either of it really moving the needle for me today.
I see.
Okay, but if it happens, we'll respond very quickly.
Got it. What do you think?
Yeah, for us, it is incredibly real. And I'll give you 2 examples of how we have made changes to be able to address this. The first on product. So clearly, as a sort of a startup airline, we had to have an incredibly competitive cost structure.
Yeah.
But we could not sacrifice the experience, right? And the experience from an airline perspective, look, we're not the Taj Mahal, we're not a beach. We've got to make sure that our journey is as hassle-free so that you can allow people to have the experience at the other end. So when it came to product definition, we put in an extra inch of foam on our seats. We put in a USB port because people bring their devices. We had larger overhead bins. When people travel, they hate checking in. You pack one less article of clothing, and then the worst thing is you have to gate check your bag and then wait for an extra 15 minutes. So there were very specific product elements that we built to make sure that not only could we offer an extremely affordable ticket, but you also had to make sure that the journey was as comfortable and hassle-free as possible. So that's certainly something very real that was deliberately designed into our product offering. The second part of it is in terms of the network. I mean, you see 25-year-olds today that aren't ultra rich, holidaying in Baku and Ho Chi Minh. There was a time, not that long ago, where it took an airline maybe 5.5 years to start international operations, and then another 10 years after that, where maybe 10, 15, 20% of your network is international. But because people are looking for international experiences, within 3.5 years of the start of our operations, 25% of our capacity is international. In the next couple of years or so, it'll be 40%. So before we hit the 5-year mark, which was, prior to this, no airline started international less than 5 years. We're already thinking 40% of our network is going to be international to places like Hanoi, and Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, etc.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. Both the points are great. And like I said, I'll follow up on aviation. I'm coming to you. But let's go to Sandeep. Sandeep, you have the advantage of looking at the data of the other countries also, just from a specific consumer behavior standpoint of where are they spending, how are they spending, and all that. What differences now, at this stage of evolution of the country, that you have started seeing for similarities or the differences of the Indian consumers versus the others? And anything interesting that you've noticed that is very positive for India?
So first, before I even go and talk about international markets and consumer spending, that flywheel effect of what's happening, what Vinay just spoke about, I completely just want to build on that. So not only as an airline, he was saying about catering to international so quickly, and that 40% of his routes or capacity is going to be towards international. What's going to be even more interesting is where are the people coming from in India who are taking those international destinations or going to those international destinations. So when we look at our credit card spend data, and we're kind of lucky that we are at this intersection of digital payments infrastructure, consumer behavior, experiential marketing, global destinations, so we get to see all of that, right?
Absolutely.
So when I look at that data, the card spends are growing from tier 2, 3, 4 cities is growing 1.5 to 2x of that in metros. So the absolute number may be still higher from metros, but today people are traveling to international destinations not just from the top 5, top 10 cities. They're actually traveling from, small town India. And they probably need to take 2 flights before they get overseas, but they're doing that. When you talk about experiences, people want memories. They want to come back and tell stories. They want to have unique, differentiated experiences. So, 5, 10 years ago, people just got onto a tour and went on that. That is definitely sort of changing significantly. I mean, in the cities we are seeing today, people, they want to go to see a Taylor Swift concert. They want to go see Coldplay in Abu Dhabi, Taylor Swift in Singapore. So a lot of the international travel is not just, I'm just ticking the box going to a country. There has to be a Formula One. There has to be a music concert. Somebody has seen a location on a Netflix serial and they want to go visit that place. So these stories are now commonplace. The role of influencers in where people are going, what they're doing. So it's a complete change. And in that sense, India is now mirroring the world. The premium Indian traveler is competing with the Japanese or the Chinese or the European travelers. They are not going to, just like a bed and breakfast place and this thing and spending like never before. Now, this may be a small sliver of the population, but just aspirationally, the mindset has changed from savings to consumption and experiences. So the younger generations today really are not necessarily thinking about saving for a rainy day. They are consuming a large part of what they earn on things like this. And it's clearly showing up in our data. And in that sense, we are kind of evolving and changing as a society for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The gap is bridging like really, really fast.
Really fast, really fast.
All right, when coming back to the aviation follow-up. So I hear you when you say, and I think Indian aviation industry in general has been super bullish about the future. And I agree with that narrative as well. However, there are so many things that go wrong. And last year is a great example of that, like many things going wrong, right? So last year clearly was not double digit, forget double digit, it was not even single digit, it was flat, right? And, you know, you have issues which range from operational issues to lack of talent issues, the shortage of pilots issue, to, you know, cost and profitability issues, to capital availability as compared to the rest of the sector's issue. There are plenty of issues that we see in this sector every now and then. Even now, some of the players might be grappling with some of those issues, right? I mean, you are a young airline, so you've been able to actually do it very thoughtfully, like you were focusing on cost structure and also experience, etc. And I'm sure because the opportunity is huge, and you know, some of these issues somehow, it appears to the industry that it holds you back. What's your take on that? Like, when will some of these temporary, quote-unquote temporary issues will go? Like whether it's a supply shortage, for example. I don't know if we have you know, beginning of last year, we were thinking that it might go away in a quarter or two, but it hasn't really gone. Like overall capacity expansion, like overall industry capacity expansion hasn't really happened. So what do you think is happening here? And more importantly, needs to change?
Correct. So, Rajesh, first, I don't think the issues that the airline industry is going to face are ever going to get easier. I've been in this industry for 35 years, and you know, there was something in the 90s, there was something in the early 2000s, there was something else in the 2010s, and something else in 2025. So thinking that anything is ever going to get fixed, not a chance. That's a pipe dream. Which is, you know, what takes me back to what does an airline need to do? So while others didn't grow, last year we grew over 30%.
Yeah.
This year we'll grow over 40%, right? So unfortunately, and it's not that one airline is the same as the other, is the same as the other, but if I had to generalize in terms of what airlines can do, it is have a competitive cost structure, be well capitalized because something is coming. You don't know what, you don't know when, but something's coming next quarter, something else will come with the quarter after. So you've got to have a lot of contingency planning, and for that you need to be well capitalized, right? Again, when it comes to what does the government need to do to change, for me, I am super lucky that we're living in a country where demand is not a problem, right? The world over, airlines need to think when they have 1.5% or 2% growth. In India, 10, 12, 14%. So for us, when demand is not a problem, it's really just how you run your airline. And that, to me, is what will determine success or failure. Just to give you maybe one last statistic, there was a period between 2010 and 2019 for an entire decade when 9 out of 10 airlines in the US were profitable, right? And the US is sort of the mother of all competitive aviation markets. And so pre-COVID, for an entire decade, you had 9 airlines that were profitable. Of that, 4 out of the top 5 had a market share of less than 4%. So just to say that, look, airlines as an industry, it can be profitable. It's just a question of how you run it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you that it's an incredibly tough sector to operate, and you know, because anything can go wrong. A lot of the uncontrollable factors also come into the play. Like last year, fuel cost was not the issue. I suspect next year fuel cost might be an issue.
Correct.
So something or the other will come. But you know, I guess you will have to be at it, fixing cost structures, looking at the experiences. Maybe well capitalized is actually a great point.
Yeah.
Because I somehow sometimes think that, and that's why I was making that capital availability point. If somebody is able to take a really long-term view on this opportunity, there should be more capital going into it. So that, you know, people end up taking a long-term horizon, and then, you know, sort of at the end of, you know, let's say 10 years sort of horizon, it's almost like insurance sector, the returns are bound to come. It's just a matter of time, right? It doesn't happen short-term in this industry.
And Raj, this is where we're lucky to have, you know, our initial investor, Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala.
Yeah.
His average holdings was 9 years, right? We've now got Premji Invest and Claypon and 361, these are blue chip marquee investors that think long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. Patu, coming to you, one of the segments, post-COVID has not necessarily done very well. In fact, it has taken forever to sort of come back to the same level, which impacts the domestic hospitality industry, is the inbound segment, right? And it's still struggling. And so the question number one for you is that what's happening there? What, in your view, can potentially sort of move the needle there? Because, the domestic hospitality industry would need that. The second, at the same time, which is a positive news, but positive news from an overall sort of growth perspective, travel and tourism growth perspective, but maybe an opportunity for hospitality sector is the outbound travel. You heard Vinay saying he was excited about more capacity that, earlier airlines used to go to international. In 10 years' time, now airlines are excited to go to international markets, short haul, 4-hour, 5-hour flying distance, very fast. And there's more and more capacity being deployed there. And this whole 4 and 5-hour sort of flying radius, from an Indian consumer standpoint, is also becoming very attractive. So I don't know if it's high time for the Indian hospitality sector, combination of both the factors, and maybe mutually exclusive, is to also start looking at some of these destinations more seriously from their business expansion strategy.
So let's talk about the first question, which is inbound.
Yeah.
My wife is American.
Yes, I know. She's here.
One day, Rajesh, you should sit and talk to her about her experiences in India when she came for the first few times. And I hung my head in shame as an Indian. I even talked to the then minister. I'll give you an example. Once she came, there were 3-4 girls. And they went to Chandni Chowk. And they came back and they told me that, everywhere they went, somebody said, can I take a selfie with you? Can I, and when they said, they're very polite Americans. So they said, yes. After some time, 30 guys were lined up. So then they said, no more. Then these guys were walking alongside taking videos. So this is unacceptable. This is totally, the worst possible, and nobody was bothered. Then you overlay it. The next time they went to Agra, I took 2 cops. I couldn't believe it. In front of me, 2 guys holding hands on top of it came up and said, can we have a selfie with you? And the 2 cops were looking in the other direction, very impressed with the architecture. That's the reality. Okay, this is not a joke, this is a reality. So I told the previous minister, he told me once, give me one good idea. Okay. And I said, do one thing. You open a monument from, say, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. I understand we are a democracy. 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., 2 hours. Since you charge Indians 20 rupees and you charge foreigners 800 bucks, make 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. 800 bucks. Indian, foreigner, whoever. And after that, for the next 12 hours, let it be, 20 and 800. Brilliant idea. The next thing I knew is there was a reshuffle, he disappeared. The secretary said, I've never heard of this. That was with Vidyavati.
I know.
I'm saying even a simple thing like that we can't do. We are in a certain way, our climate works against us, okay? It's super hot, super cold, it's dusty, you have AQI issues, we have lots of issues. We can't, there's a limit to what we can solve for, but certainly we can solve for the safety, security, hygiene, public conveniences, these kind of fundamental things in our top 100 monuments.
Yeah.
So I believe that we need to start with small steps. You can't change everything. But till we solve for all this, our reputation for an inbound destination, how many years can we flog the Taj Mahal here? We don't, for example, I've always said Ellora is one of the most amazing monuments in the world. We don't even market the damn thing. So I don't want to go down this, otherwise I'll start weeping. But let me talk about outbound, because to me that's more exciting. China in 2006 had, I think, 25 million outbound, and in 2013 had 130 million or something. The entire hotel industry in those 7-8 years, Rajesh, every hotel worldwide started offering congee, Chinese food, and so on. It told you the Chinese consumer was such a large part of the total spend. I think it's going to happen in India. I think airlines, it's been fantastic for them. It's been a great run. I hear 10%, 15, 20% growth. I don't see that in the hospitality industry. And I've always wondered that where is this missing link? If so many more guys are flying, then surely so many more guys should be staying with us. So perhaps because we are a fragmented industry, we don't have enough. You would have actually a better view on it than I do.
Yeah.
But I do think 100 million Indians are going to travel overseas in the next 5 years. And I think we have a pretty good guess where they're going to go. One obvious indicator is 4 or 5 hours travel. And certainly we'd like to be in every one of those markets.
Awesome.
No, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, Patu was sharing this story, what he was talking about, the poor experience that Haider had. And since you mentioned Taj, and I think I was sharing it with him, I had personal experience similar at Taj as well. And not necessarily people trying to click selfies with me, but that happened in China. It did not happen in Agra because I was really tall many, many moons ago. But it was just the queue experience. It's just the entering of the monument experience. And all kinds of, sort of tricks were generally available, in the vicinity for you to be able to just tap into them and then get into it. So I think some of those things, and I think Sandeep was making that point on hygiene, safety, security, etc. I think as the country is developing, and there's a lot more that has to happen. And I think it's also about the civic sense of the society and people, and I really, really hope the more and more awareness gets created on that front. So, because it resonated with me, so I thought I'll share that story as well. So one last question in interest of time, Sandeep, for you. Financial services sector in India has also been going through massive transformational change, right? In fact, in many ways, if there is always a talk about India has not necessarily been the leader in many, many markets, maybe the followers, we catch up, we consume more than we build, etc. In the financial services sector, we ended up taking lead specifically on payments, right? With UPI, I think it's just was the game changer, sort of innovation that happened, and it's going places to other countries, etc. Maybe China was able to do it, but the private sector did it, not the government, right? So here it was government initiative. On the overall digitization, UPI, Aadhaar are like phenomenal examples there. Now, in the context of your business, Visa or Master, like the two behemoths, conventional payment companies, very focusing on credit and all, with the new advent of new fintech companies, you obviously have not really been participating in any of that. There's a lot of the innovations leading to some headwinds for your business. How are you sort of thinking about it more strategically? And is there anything that because the opportunity size is still very, very big, right? I mean, it's hard to ignore even for your business. Would you be, at least for future, thinking differently, or you want to stay focused on the credit card market? And that, of course, is growing. But, one of the charts, I don't know if the slide that you were already sitting in the room or not, Karan was saying 60% cash, which was mind-blowing number. By 2030, it'll be 40%. And the rest was UPI pretty much. Credit cards was single digit, 9% or 10%, right? So that market is small. In absolute terms, it might still be big. Any future plans with respect to this transformational change that is happening in India?
Oh, absolutely. So look, we're actually much more than a card company. In fact, we've been talking at these conferences and meetings because we've become more like a digital payment and tourism ecosystem orchestrator, because we have a lot of valuable data of which we then work back with companies like Make My Trip, with the airline partners, with hotel partners, and in the tourism ecosystem. And, for all the success of UPI, where, Indian government and the regulator and the ecosystem players have done a phenomenal job, we're still a 50% plus cash economy. A country of 1.4, 1.5 billion people, we have 116.5 million credit cards, and only half those are unique credit cards.
Yeah.
Because folks like you and me probably have 4 or 5 cards in our wallet. So the point is, there is a significant opportunity for cash displacement. There's a significant opportunity for democratization of credit. If you are a self-employed businessman, even today, it's not easy for you to get credit in this country, be it for your business or your personal needs. So there's a huge runway, huge opportunity. International money movement and remittances are also quite expensive, and there's a lot of opacity. And all of this ties back again, if we want to grow tourism, we want to grow travel, this further digitization is important. And as I was talking to Vinay and you before the panel, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, New York, great examples of how seamless, frictionless, secure payments are with biometric authentication. The big thing waiting to happen in India is Apple Pay. We still don't have Apple Pay. Morocco and Vietnam have Apple Pay. India doesn't have it. And all of these things will be game changers, and it will benefit all the participants, including companies like ours.
By the way, talking about Apple, I just saw sitting there a flash on Apple talking to the Indian banks to try to come to India first.
Absolutely.
All right, on this good note, let me thank you all. Lovely interacting with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.